Hello, I am Blaze, and welcome back to Warframe. Today I will be a little different, as you may have caught on from the thumbnail. Today will be an overview of the new Stradavar and Dark Split Sword, and my analysis of what they are compared to what they could have been. The Stradavar blueprint is available from the market for 20,000 credits, while the Dark Split Sword is researched from your clan dojo's Tenno lab with a blueprint replication cost of 15,000 credits. Respectively, the Stradavar's crafting requirements in the foundry are 20,000 credits, 15,000 ferrite, 8,000 polymer bundles, 3 neural sensors, and 2 argon crystals, and the Dark Split Sword's crafting requirements are 20,000 credits, a dual skana, 1 fully built forma, 1,200 rubido, and 10 mutagen masses. They are also both available from the market for platinum, with weapon slots and pre-installed catalysts as well, but I'll leave that to you on whether or not you consider it worth your money. Let's start with the Stradavar. Statistically, it's fine. It features a base damage of 30, split between 15 puncture, 10.5 slash, and 4.5 impact damage for a decent spread, and outputs its fire at 10 rounds per second from a reasonably well-stocked magazine of 65 rounds. It also has an OK accuracy rating at 28.6. Its status chance is completely forgettable at 5%, and features a somewhat low 10% critical chance and a 2x critical damage multiplier. It also comes along with 2 V polarities by default, which is actually pretty nice. The Stradavar's main selling point mechanic is that it's the first select fire weapon in Warframe. Pressing your Alt fire button will cycle the Stradavar between fully automatic and semi-automatic firing modes. Semi-auto mode reducing the fire rate to just 5 rounds per second, but in exchange increases the critical chance to 20%, which ends up being rather elevated compared to other weapons. So a cool idea here. Use fully automatic for rapid fire at close range, and use semi-automatic fire for accurate shots at longer distance to help mitigate recoil. Right? Right. Recoil. This is kind of where the Stradavar stops making sense. Typically, alternate fire modes are used to help the player control their weapon at longer ranges, where fully auto fire would be hell without tight trigger discipline. The issue is, Warframe doesn't have a recoil system to speak of. Almost everything is just random shaking around with no directional influence whatsoever. Some guns have a bit of actual recoil, but this largely takes the form of quickly jumping up to a certain angle and then not going any further. And still just randomly shaking around. To compare and contrast, I'll hop into PlanetSide 2 very quickly, even though I haven't played it in ages, to demonstrate the very important difference between just haphazard angle changes and an actual recoil system. Here's what happens when I hold down the trigger in PlanetSide 2 without manipulating the mouse. See that? For the first number of rounds, the actual cone of fire was right where the crosshair or the red dot was, and as more rounds were fired, the muzzle actually continued to climb in a certain direction. And this pattern varies weapon to weapon, so even though they are otherwise fairly similar, they all have their own little set of characteristics to learn. This is how a lot of games that focus more on gunplay as well as long distances differentiate close range and long range guns. Close range guns can hose out bullets at a rapid pace, but are too difficult to control at longer ranges. Longer range guns are comparatively easy to control and may do more damage per shot, but have something else that stops them from excelling at close combat. Either a slow fire rate, or inferior burst damage compared to specialized close range guns like shotguns or submachine guns, poor hipfire accuracy, or something else. These games also tend to have differing damage values over different ranges to further differentiate the abilities of short range and long range guns to excel or compete in their respective tasks. My main point is that the Stradavar's unique aspect makes zero sense in Warframe. There are no systems in place for it to actually be able to take advantage of select fire. Shooting it in semi-auto mode doesn't even increase the accuracy to an appreciable degree, and while the critical chance is bumped up, the fire rate is nuked so hard that there's almost no point to it. It's honestly better to just build for critical hits and stick with the fully automatic fire mode. Even if that only has a 10% critical chance, the fire rate does mean that it actually performs better with the critical build as opposed to an elemental build somehow. So what about the Dark Split Sword? This is something that has been teased and shown around a fair bit, and recently it was finally released. It straddles the line between the heavy blade and dual sword category, allowing you to determine which way it acts by equipping either one of those weapons' stances. Cool, right? Well, sort of. Here are the base stats. What remains constant are as follows. It will always maintain its damage as purely radiation, maintains a 1.0 attack rate across both forms, though given the animation difference the actual speeds are wildly different, and keeps a 2 times critical damage and 1.5 channeling damage multiplier in both cases. In its default and heavy blade stance equipped form it has 80 base damage, which disappointingly is the worst of all the heavy blades, a 10% critical chance and a 20% status chance. With body count and blood rush you could potentially still run this with a berserker build on it, but it's not that great. Its dual sword form, when you equip either Swirling Tiger or Crossing Snakes, is more convincing, featuring 65 base damage, which is actually quite high for dual swords, and tied with a Dex Dakra. It does however also get knocked down to a mere 5% critical chance and a lowered 15% status chance. Although of note is the fact that the dual sword form has a much higher slide attack damage at 390, the same as the previous slide attack king Cronin. The Boltus still wins out on this one, but slide attacks are not a bad option here. So the dual sword version is okay and the heavy blade version is kinda crap. Seriously, the heavy blade combined form is a Galatine that is not only shorter but also has 45 less damage, and the Galatine is available at Mastery rank 3 instead of 5. Derp. But my main problem with the Dark Split Sword isn't there. I could also say that the fact that it uses heavy blade moves with a dagger pointing towards you simply begs for self-impalement is also pretty silly, but that isn't it either. Even though its stats are half bad and half mediocre, that would be forgivable if it actually bought into its concept as being 2 weapons in one. It could have been like Bloodborne, use a charge attack as a transform move to swap between the dual sword and heavy blade movesets on the fly. Give it 2 stand slots, one for dual sword and one for heavy blade, and use whatever is the lowest capacity increase. But no. As cool as this thing could have been, even if a bit nonsensical, Digital Extremes just couldn't quite seem to manage it. Maybe it was some engine limitation they locked themselves into a long time ago, or maybe the class structure isn't really set up to support strategy and composite software design patterns this way, or something. I can only guess as I have zero inside knowledge of how the game actually works, but as it stands, what we have is a brief curiosity. Hey, here's a weapon that can use 2 different kinds of stances. Neat, right? Okay, next please. The Stradavar and Dark Split Sword. 2 weapons that really could have been pretty awesome, but ended up being hamstrung by regrettably half-baked implementation. The Stradavar's select fire makes it feel like it's a gun from a completely different game that just doesn't work well in Warframe at all, having its conceptual roots broken on arrival. And that makes me sad because everything else about the Stradavar is nice. It looks very Warframe from an aesthetic standpoint, it has some of the best sound assets yet, and personally it reminds me of the Vickers K machine gun. I kind of wish it had a higher fire rate now that I mention that, but oh well. And the Dark Split Sword has the opposite problem. Its concept is amazing and it fits right into Warframe. We are Tenno, a bunch of space ninja wizards that do awesome things and slaughter enough of our enemies to be honorary space marines. Here's a weapon that can split apart on the fly. Is it practical? Hell no, but we don't care. Except the actual development just kinda got halfway there, sat down and basically said, yup, right here seems fine. And that makes me sad as well because the Dark Split Sword could have been the next Redeemer in the sense of something that is just style over everything else to the point where it's actually completely awesome. But this is where we are with these 2 weapons. Maybe the devs really did their best, but hit some roadblock along the way that stopped them fulfilling the initial vision they wanted. As somewhat of a creative type myself, I can't imagine that how they are right now is what they wanted them to be. The Dark Split Sword at the very least. But I suppose life just doesn't quite always go your way. I would like them to revisit these concepts at a later date after they figure out some other ways to implement them. Maybe Recoil 2.0 to make select fire and trigger discipline more beneficial, and rework the game's structure to allow those weird combinations the Dark Split Sword seems like it was made for. But for now, we can only hope. Thank you for following along with this video in which I expressed disappointment at the Stradavar and Dark Split Sword. As always, all comments are appreciated and I hope to see you around next time. For more Warframe content, you can click down below to check my overview and rant for Worm Prime, or for something completely different you can check my ongoing playthrough of Dark Souls 3, or watch me build a budget gaming PC. Yes, I am going down the tech video rabbit hole. But in any case, as always, good luck, have fun, and take care.